Tucker Carlson posted episode 1 of his new Twitter show to the platform yesterday. The former Fox News host did not hold back when it came to bashing the mainstream media establishment, war hawks in Washington, D.C., or even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Question is, who did it? Well, let's see. The Kakhovka Dam was effectively Russian. It was built by the Russian government. It currently sits in Russian-controlled territory. The dam's reservoir supplies water to Crimea, which has been, for the last 240 years, home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Blowing up the dam may be bad for Ukraine, but it hurts Russia more. And for precisely that reason, the Ukrainian government has considered destroying it. In December, the Washington Post quoted a Ukrainian general saying his men had fired American-made rockets at the dam's floodgate as a test strike. So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that the Ukrainians probably blew it up, just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall. And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that, as we now know. It's not like Vladimir Putin is anxious to wage war on himself. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Cable News consumer. Vladimir Putin is exactly that sort of man, the sort of man who'd shoot himself to death in order to annoy you. We know this from the American media, which wasted no time this morning in accusing the Russians of sabotaging their own infrastructure.
As of this morning, the video has raked in over 63 million views and reportedly 20 million views within the first 24 hours.
So, Tucker, they're obviously discussing this dam demolition that has a somewhat similar kind of narrative framing as Nord Stream, with a lot of initial blaming on Russia and some people asking questions about whether that's actually most likely along the lines that Tucker is doing there, asking whether, in fact, it was the Ukrainians. So that is, you know, that's the kind of, I think that's a very valid line of inquiry, and the kind of, you know, narrative that the mainstream media is totally uninterested in telling. This is like the best case for a Tucker-type programming that actually asks these questions that most people are thinking and wondering, but the very pro-Ukraine, pro-Zelensky consensus in mainstream media is not willing to explore very carefully.
Yes, let's get into some of the kind of brass tacks of this. The whole clip was about 10 minutes long, which in my recollection is somewhat shorter than his normal monologues in the Fox News context, and definitely shorter than the show in his entirety, because there was, at least for this first episode, no interview portion of the show.
That might be about a monologue. Maybe it can go up to 12 minutes or so.
Some of them would go rather long. I've definitely watched monologues that were closer to 20 minutes long, but I don't know if those were anomalous or not. So format-wise, you're already having that shift. I saw some commentators say that they thought that Tucker seemed less impressive. I think this was Taylor Lorenz, who said that without the Fox kind of graphics and infrastructure and formatting, that he seemed less impressive, like a man sitting in a room with a camera that wasn't distinguished.
That's all we are.
No, but that's exactly the point that she was making, that it was indistinguishable from your average podcaster and is part of the magic of Tucker Carlson bringing the kinds of views that can be fringe but are very common on the internet into the mainstream. And is it still as powerful outside of that mainstream context? And
without the production values.
No, without having the platform of a mainstream show whose views often were not Tucker's views. So the magic of Tucker Carlson, is it really that he's saying what he's saying, or more so that he's saying what he's saying on a mainstream news platform beamed into regular normie Americans' homes, as opposed to people who are going on the internet to find whatever information?
I saw that Taylor tweet. I thought she and other people making this criticism were essentially saying, no, it needs, what about the graphics and the B-roll and all that kind of stuff, the sprucing it up, making it look good.
It's both. So what do you think about both aspects of that?
I mean, I don't know. I bet people who enjoy Tucker were probably also entertained and enjoying what they were watching on the Twitter version. Obviously, high production values help. We try to improve our show with, like, there's a nice little graphic, has my name on the screen, right? Oh, they just made it go away. All that kind of stuff makes it better. It's important. But ultimately, I think that the content is king. And if it's the same content.
So there were also
I don't agree, basically.
Yeah, there were these content criticisms as well. Mehdi Hassan chimed in, noting that it was ridiculous in his view for him to have come out immediately talking about 9/11 trutherism and aliens. That was Mehdi's takeaway.
Right, overlooking this very legitimate questions about how this dam was destroyed, the kind of good journalism, skepticism, and scrutiny that you would like someone like a Mehdi Hassan to be able to do on his own show, but never
specifically
does.
I mentioned the aliens and the 9/11 trutherism.
He finished with some of that. I think we've got another clip. Let's play it.
On the front page of the New York Times website this morning, there were 5 stories about Ukraine, as well as 4 stories apiece about Donald Trump, trans people, and climate change, the usual lineup. There was nothing at all about how an alien species is flying hypersonic aircraft over our cities. Not one word. So if you're wondering why our country seems so dysfunctional, this is a big part of the reason. Nobody knows what's happening. A small group of people control access to all relevant information, and the rest of us don't know. We're allowed to yap all we want about racism, but go ahead and talk about something that really matters and see what happens. If you keep it up, they'll make you be quiet. Trust us.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting at something I've complained about, the routine overclassification of government documents and secrets that you're not privy to, that we don't know what's going on, that our federal bureaucracy is totally out of control, and our law enforcement is totally weaponized. Now, I don't put as much stock in the alien disclosures as we talked about yesterday. I think you were more excited about this than I was, the alien stuff.
Yeah,
I'm very, very skeptical, but I agree that there should be more and total transparency about whatever the government has.
Well, I mean, specifically what he said there was that you're allowed to talk about things like racism, which don't matter. But we are willing to talk about, we are restricted from talking about aliens, which presumably do matter. And as much as I think it's perfectly plausible that aliens have landed, and I don't have any issue with talking about that sort of thing, I am rankled by the zero-sum game framing of that, as though it's a problem to be talking about racism. We should be spending more time devoted to talking about aliens. Moreover, he seems to critique the idea that there were 5 stories about Ukraine, when the bulk of his own monologue tonight was, of course, about Ukraine. Now, a different angle than the New York Times or the Washington Post.
Calling BS on the dominant narrative about Ukraine.
But the critique, as we heard just now in that segment, was not of the skew. Earlier in the clip, he talks about the skew of the mainstream media being the critique. In this section, he's saying that they will only talk about these subjects. 5 articles about Ukraine, that's a problem. Articles about trans issues and racism, that's a problem. I agree that there are a lot of things the New York Times and these other magazines should be talking about. They should be talking about poverty. They should be talking about the fact that we have something in this country called medical bankruptcy, which only exists in a country where you don't have universal health care, and people's health care ability to go to the doctor is tied to their employment. That we have a student loan crisis where a huge percentage of student borrowers are saying they're frankly not going to be able to afford to make the payments that they're now being required by the Biden administration to resume in September. The fact that 74% of Democrats, Americans, I believe, don't want Joe Biden to run again, but we have a gerontocracy where we can't get a presidential candidate who's under 75 years old. Well, there are a lot of things that we should be talking about.
That's a version of what Tucker is saying, is that the priorities of the mainstream media are totally misplaced, and they overly focus on the cultural obsessions of a sliver of the population that are elite and wealthy and highly educated,
Robby,
and interested in.
What I'm saying is, while that top-level critique is accurate, instead of pointing us to genuinely economically populist concerns, he is steering us toward other culture war concerns. He's saying we need to be talking more about aliens and 9/11, and that's what.
Aliens and I don't agree on 9/11 trutherism at all. I don't know that that's culture war concerns. In fact, I actually saw a lot of conservatives on Twitter complaining about the alien story because it's distracting from the culture war, saying that aliens get injected into the narrative every time culture warriors are making progress because it's distracting.
So Tucker Carlson's not in line with the broader Republican audience, you're saying?
I'm saying he's not in line with these very online right-wing people who were saying that. But again, most of the show, what he spent on his Twitter show, the time he spent, was on I think you agree, a legitimate Ukraine, the dam explosion, from a non-establishment, independent perspective that is actually cross-ideological, this is the suspicions shared by very right-wing people and leftists and libertarians and independent people who know that mainstream coverage of what's going on in Ukraine has just been utterly propagandistic and one-sided. And I think this is a important, legitimate thing to discuss. That's not. Oh, I'm not going to talk about economic populism because I'm obsessed with wokeness. This is an important thing.
Yeah, and I agree with that. So I don't know what else to say. I agree with that aspect of it, but there are these other things that he's talking about, these other criticisms. So one of the other critiques that he got was, even if you disagree with Zelensky from a political perspective, he referred to him as sweaty, rat-like, and a persecutor of Christians. Many Jewish commentators, including Matt Duss, who was Bernie's foreign policy guy, called this out, saying that it was anti-Semitic. Specifically, Matt Duss wrote, "I don't care if his Erstas populism gives you a little thrill. No decent or effective anti-fascist left can have anything to do with this anti-Semite." A number of others were resurfacing the classically anti-Semitic tropes that many people have, I think, forgotten in more recent history, but which do specifically link Jewish people to, rat-like stereotypes and the shifty-eyedness and things like that in a way that does seem pretty damning. I mean, do you think those kinds of choices are purposeful on the part of Tucker Carlson? Do you think that that's a legitimate pushback, even if you disagree with American foreign policy in Ukraine?
I mean, no, I don't. I don't think mocking people's appearances is a generally good tactic in general. I didn't see that specific part of the clip. Maybe it's playing into anti-Semitic tropes. I have no idea whether it is or not, but yeah, you shouldn't do that if that's what he's doing.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, some commentators have looked at those aspects of it and said, well, this feels like it's being written by Stormfront. Remember, he had that controversy where one of his writers had to be let go at Fox News because they did come from one of the explicitly alt-right media organizations, and even Fox News had to let them go. In a situation where Tucker Carlson is genuinely independent, are we going to see more collaboration with either people like that from that kind of background, language that is more reminiscent of what you find on those kind of platforms and not so explicitly on a place like Fox News? And is it going to make Tucker more effective, less effective, more credible, less credible, more credible with people who already sort of like him? What direction is this going to go now that the format itself has changed?
Okay, I'm not personally a big fan, as I've said, of mocking political figures' appearances because I think it's mean-spirited. But there's no rule against that, and obviously Donald Trump is like the most mocked based on his physical appearance figure of like all time, including by very mainstream people. And I don't, and everyone gets all worked up.
Although I would say there's a difference between mocking someone's physical appearance because they look goofy in knee-high white boots, let's say, like Ron DeSantis or something like that, and playing on tropes that have been wielded to dehumanize people and which led to a genocide that killed millions of people. So, I mean, we saw with one of the recent shooters, was it the Buffalo shooter, I believe, who had the manifesto that was filled with reams and reams of pages of physiognomies of like skulls and profiles of both Black and Jewish people and ample explanations of why he thought these people were worth killing and why their lives were of no value. And then he went and he killed those people. So I will say that this isn't just saying, oh, I don't like Sarah Palin's lipstick or, Bill Clinton's looking really skinny these days. This is a little bit different, I think, in nature. If, in fact, you agree that he was playing on those kind of stereotypes, I'm deferring to others who are weighing in here. And I'm interested to see what the audience makes of this as well. Of course, we'll be seeing many more episodes of Tucker Carlson's show, and we will bring any new news on that front to you here on The Hill. More Rising after this.